Quite the talent he is. Proper chatterbox yada. If you're keen, it'll be brilliant. Today, we're going to keep it simple. I'll bark out a basic command and you watch. Keen to know? He'll set your tail wagging. Does mine, hence why I'm backing him. Right then, Wookie here. Do take a seat, won't you? Give us your full attention while we listen to my pal, Yada.
Well, welcome back to our library studio and a continuation of our Luminaries series. We're in the book of Joel. It means Yahweh is God, the second chapter. And we have done several shows on Joel 2:14, and we're actually going to move on from that point. But the basics revelation of Luminaries is all designed to draw everyone's attention to the individuals that God says are the most important players in his plans. There are two individuals who serve as signs for the Moedim. These are the 7 annual meetings with Yahweh, where we get to walk from man's world to God's. And they are positioned throughout prophecy as the sun and the moon, with one reflecting the light of the other, and serving throughout prophetic revelations to show God's people what they need to know for them to be part of the covenant family. So after 23 years, in fact, now it's almost 25 years of both private and public discovery, I have come to realize that much of what Yahweh has to say to and about Israel revolves around and includes Yada in one way or another. And it has been this way for a very long time. Better part, of 6,000 years. In other words, 2,000 years before there even was a Yisrael. Yada is among God's most deployed and cooperative co-workers. Making this personal, Yahweh wants everyone to know Yada's role in changing the mindset, the very thinking of the last generation of Yehudim, so that a significant number listen, so that they, along with Goyim, change their attitude, and they choose to participate in the upcoming harvest and part of that mortal remnant that returns to enter the garden on Sukkah. This is all that we have tried to present and convey in the books and the vlogs, all free at yadayah.com. So with each returning soul, I think God lets out a bit of a sigh of relief, and he smiles. It would take a while, but humanity was obviously worth the effort. And we demonstrated that we could listen, we could follow directions, and even respond in a mutually beneficial manner. Just as Yahweh had foretold, Yada would reintroduce his Shem, his name. He would restore his Bokor, his firstborn son's reputation. He would encourage participation in the Bereth and reuse and reissue, revise, not so much revise, but certainly rededicate, restore the invitations that are proclaimed through the Moedim. Over the course of 25 years, a library has come to be written so that God's testimony is more accurately presented, more adroitly and convincingly than ever before. Religions would be excoriated, and this would clear the path to God. For the first time in 25 centuries, the world would know that Yahweh is offering something very special, and he is offering it contingent with his guidance, his instructions, and he expects something in return. His timeline has now been reestablished. there's going to be a harvest on Shabuah as we start the time of Israel's troubles. The purging sacrifice is going to transpire on Teruah, the greatest show on earth. And as a result, a remnant of Yisrael and Goyim are going to be spared. Of course, this is a lot for one life, and yet it's only 1 in 8 in the case of Yada, although not all of them are full lives. And of all of them, they seem to coalesce around a singular theme, all to support Yahweh's firstborn son, Dod. These lives include Chanuk, and I've shared this with you in a previous program, and each of these individuals' names and when they lived. So we are recounting previous material here, but you have Chanuk, you have Noach, Midod, which was a adult insertion, Boaz, which was probably the most enjoyable of all of the lives. Then as Ethan Hajraki, again as an adult insertion, Boaz, yes, the same way. And finally, a full life as Yada, as the Nakri, the Choder, and the Zeroah. Over the past 2 millennia, Yada, which means he knows, has been unique in that he is the lone individual in all of that time to discover, prove, and share that Dod is not only the Son of God, not only the returning Messiah, who as our Savior fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Makurim, as the Zeroah, he is the sacrificial lamb. I am the first to present the conditions of the covenant and the intent of the invitation, so you understand how they coalesce into a single story. As with God, so it is with his voice. Yahweh invests as many words excoriating religion as he does promoting his intended relationship, because one is not possible without the other. And that's why he has inspired me to write the 3 volumes of Babel, condemning the book of Ezekiel and with it Judaism, Twistianity, negating Christianity, and goddamn religion, completely expunging any credibility from the Quran and Hadith and thus Islam. All while extolling the benefits of the Torah and an introduction to God, uniquely awakening Yehudim through the 5 volumes of observations, and then try to speak for our King and the 3 and certainly to be 5 at the very least volumes of coming home. And from this perspective, Yahweh has fulfilled this prophecy, even exceeding expectations, especially considering all that was revealed in the 9 volumes of Yada Yahweh, covering creation, Eden, the covenant, the Mikra, God's calendar, and concluding in the time of trouble. Therefore, the answer to the rhetorical question as to who reveals and acknowledges Yah, who knows and understands, is Yahweh, having done so for the benefit of his wayward children. God wants his people to appreciate what Yada has observed and perceived by studying his prophets. So it is all by Shub. Shub for Shub or no Shub for you. Are you ready to return to Yahweh? And so for these reasons, Yada Sha'ar will remain around to ensure that a remnant of God's people are spared Akar in the end. This is God's gift to Israel, one which is beneficial, commendable, and uplifting. So I can only hope that you're among those who are appreciative of what Yahweh is offering. Now, I recognize that God might argue otherwise, but until recently, I perceived my deployment as largely irrelevant and nothing more than the result of being responsive when no one else was listening. It wasn't that I was the first or best choice, that I was at the head of a long line of viable options, and that, well, I shouted my way to garner attention. No, I stood alone. But that was also true with Chinook, and Noach, Boaz, and Ethan, even with Moshe and Dode. And I don't suspect that they felt any differently. This is ultimately, it is Yahweh's choice as to who he chooses to empower and to work through. And his approach has always been done this way. And whether we are comfortable with it or not, he likes to share credit and acknowledge those who engage on his behalf. So yada, he knows, was scribed in the participle form, making yada an actionable noun. And it is from this realization that Yoel, Yahweh's God, said something that is, well, I think particularly relevant. Whoever knows yada, acknowledging and appreciating what yada revealed, realizes and pays attention to what needs to be comprehended. He will alter the mindset to enable the return and restoration by repairing this relationship for those who had turned away. He will provide encouragement while changing attitudes so they will relent, all by offering understanding. He will ensure that a remnant is spared in the end by following him. And with the benefit and blessing of a sacrifice, a gift freely offered by this chosen and appointed one, who will be installed and set a place for this purpose, he is always woven into the story. He's part of this special relationship with Yahweh, your God. So it's reassuring, and I think in many ways affirming when we read such things from our God. So now, both as a father figure and on behalf of the covenant family, as someone upon whom Dode can lean going forward, Yahweh has appointed and positioned Yada as a Nasak, as one literally woven into the fabric of his story and into time, all for this explicit purpose and in his presence. As a result of our collaborative effort, Yada Yahweh is today's shofar. It is the trumpet being blasted to draw our attention to the signs posted along the way, to the mikre, these invitations to be called out and meet, to the covenant, to the very time that we are now in the midst of God's story, just now 9 days from the beginning of the time of troubles. So we read, sound the shofar in Zion, among the signs posted along the way. You should choose to be set apart and special, dedicated to serve, consecrating a fast, a time of abstaining from what others are consuming. Of your own accord, you should announce and welcome the invitation to a select few in this highly restrictive assembly meeting. You know, if you're in Israel, you need to move away from what others are consuming. The kosher foods of the rabbis should be seen as toxic to your souls. You need to be set apart from the Talmud and from societal customs. You need to recognize that there were signs posted along the way, and that is what it means when we say Zion. You need to appreciate why God chose a ram's horn shofar and why it is being blown, both on Shabuah and again on Teruah, and what those days announce. Recognize this invitation. Realize that it is for a select few. I've said that I wouldn't be surprised if there were as few as 80 people as part of the Shabuah harvest, because God's not interested in quantity, but instead quality. And the good news for those who might have thought they would be brought along but may not be is that when it occurs and they witness all the things that we have said by analyzing God's prophetic testimony, they will be more committed than ever. They will do everything that can be humanly done to earn God's trust, his favor. And that engagement is going to pay dividends. That motivation is going to deliver an outstanding result. Should you be among those who are expecting to go and it just not be quite enough, then you will have received this marvelous opportunity to make a tremendous difference. You're not being robbed of anything. You're being given a tremendous gift. And that is why I want you to have an appreciation for the fact that if I say that I think there may be as few as 80 people because God is talking about a highly restrictive assembly meeting, then give it your all. Engage, contribute, make a difference in other people's lives. As a matter of fact, if you are among those who are left behind, don't focus on yourself. Don't pout. Get out of yourself and contribute to the lives of others, and you'll make the next ride. So I don't suppose that it was by chance that after speaking of the role Yada will play in restoring the remnant of Israel, that we are asked to sound the shofar in recognition that it is blown to commemorate the Moedim for which Yada is specifically responsible. The harvests of Shabuah and Teruah. Nor was it a coincidence that the location will be on Zion, along the ridgeline of Moriah, connecting Yahweh's home with Dod's. It is by acknowledging these signs and responding to them that we are set apart from a world of men and unto the things of God. So while all of this is as expected, I think for many, me saying, providing you with a definition of Atzerah might have been a bit of a surprise. Because while my rendering was precisely accurate, it was unexpected. So this is this harvest of Shabuah that's upcoming. It's more about exclusion than inclusion. As a matter of fact, there's a bunch of malcontents that think it's their harvest. They're not only excluded, they're being sent off to Sheol. So, this is something that God wants you to have an appreciation with. It's Atzerah. And that's saying a lot. So, the invitation is being offered to many, but there will be a very select few individuals who are going to RSVP in a manner that God is going to view as appropriate. And it's not going to be for lack of opportunity. Particularly now, I've done so much, and so have so many others, to serve up an opportunity for you to contribute on a silver platter. The only thing that stands between you and making a contribution on behalf of others is you, if you're not doing so. Now, the reason for all of this should be obvious, although it is seldom discussed because no one wants to discuss such things. Once elevated into the covenant, a soul becomes immortal, exponentially empowered, and enormously enabled. And with such things and this enhanced capability, an individual who is unwilling to listen and respond appropriately, who cannot be trusted to exercise this tremendous increase in power and influence consistent with Yahweh's specifications, well, they would cause considerable disruption as a liability rather than an asset. This is why even those like Miriam, Moshe's sister, who, was briefly referred to as a prophetess, so he would say absolutely has to be in the covenant. Well, she was booted out because rather than making a contribution, she became an obstacle. So not only isn't God trying to save everyone, he's actually being restrictive. And to the extent that he would prefer none to many. Given the choice of none to many, God would choose none. Now, it's not going to be none, and it's not going to be many. But you need to know the extreme position that God is in. The first thing that he said is that when the sum of man became many, I regret them. I regret that I had anything to do with them. I regret I conceived them. I regret I acted among them. I don't like them. They're horrible. Many men are bad men. It's only when we are few that we express any positive attributes. So covenant members have to be Kadesh, set apart and special, making them exceedingly uncommon by definition. It is one of the reasons we pulled away from all social media, spending no time on X, no time on Facebook, no time in any of these places. So those who are Kadosh are devoted to Yah. We are not like most humans, because what impresses humans in terms of a following and wealth and control and possessions that don't mean anything to us. And so ultimately, those who transcend the dimensions and go on this voyage of discovery and empowerment and liberation on Shabua or on Teruah, they're going to be rare. They will be far fewer than 1 in a million. If you are religious and you're part of a group, if it's the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredim, where you can be counted into the millions, or you're a Muslim and it's in the billions, or in Christians and it's upwards into multiple billions, you're on the wrong path. Absolutely, unequivocally. This idea that you're right and I'm wrong because you're more popular is proof that you're wrong. Now, should you be reading this, or listening to it actually before it transpires, I have tried to make it abundantly clear the next harvest will be reaped on the Moed, the appointment of the restoring witness of Shabuah of 7 sevens. However, that is not even its primary purpose. It is to designate the beginning of the time of troubles, just as Teruah not only designates the end, but provides the answer, a means to restoration. So this ingathering will transpire 7 years in advance of its fulfillment on Teruah, 7 years and 4 months, because we're going from one Mikre to the fulfillment of the next, Shabuah to Teruah. And while I've shared this information previously, since it's vital to Israel's survival, the 7 Moedim have been, are always will continue to be celebrated on God's schedule. And I have shared the reasons behind each of them in previous programs. So at this point, you don't need me to reiterate the purpose of Pesach, Matzah, or Bikurim, or know that one opens the doorway to life, other purges our souls of guilt so that we can be adopted into the covenant family, or that Shabuah is a harvest of mature grain, that Teruah is the time that Yahweh restores the earth, ridding it all of every trace of religion and politics, restoring our planet back to the conditions of Eden, such that there will be a grand wedding and homecoming on Kippurim, and that we'll be invited to bring the mortal remnant of Yisrael and some Goyim into the 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah. So God says, you will have chosen to be gathered as a family for a harvest, moving as a people from one place to another during this ingathering. It's a kaf. You will have decided to be a community set apart as special and unique. You know, Yoel isn't just telling you prophecy. He's telling you how to be prepared for what's coming. He is saying that on the Shabuah harvest, where you blow the shofar, and again at its bookend on the other side of Israel's troubles on Teruah, that those who participate will have chosen to be gathered as a family for the harvest. We will go from one place to another during this ingathering. Those who are included will have decided to be a community set apart as special and unique. This morning, when we were doing our vlog on the vlog, I made it very clear that you write your own ticket. You get to sign your name on your own RSVP. If you're wondering if you've done enough to be included, that's on you. God says if you've decided to be a community set apart and special and unique, then you're among those who will be considered. And by the way, if you miss it, 7 years later, there's the Tarua Ingathering, and it's for darn sure, after all that you have learned and been exposed to and have seen, you won't miss that, will you? And I can't imagine many things more beneficial than having in that 7-year gap 100 or 200 or 300 people that were exposed to the truth and didn't do enough to impress God that you could be trusted. Because guess what? He's going to have your undivided attention, and you're going to be exceedingly productive on behalf of the covenant, or that, and you're just going to prove that you never should have been considered in the first place. You will want to collect and withdraw in the harvest the most prominent and mature members of the community. That's what you're going to want to do. You're not going to want to bring into the harvest the babies. No babies in the harvest. However, after the harvest, we can escort the children. But you're going to want to collect and withdraw in the harvest the most prominent and mature members of the community. It's Kabatz Zekin. You will have chosen to obtain and be part of the ingathering of the leaders and of the elders. Your desire, of course, will be to gather and escort the children who are adolescents, including the infants who are nursing. Guess what? Yes, that's true. And it goes right to the next sentence. The bridegroom will be coming out. Why? Because when we pass the two harvests, God's already described who's going to participate. When we pass these two harvests, then our entire attention is on the infants, on the mortal remnant who have known Yahweh for a matter of hours. And it's those individuals that our entire dedication will be to bring them into the garden and to have them participate in the great homecoming, the family reunion, and the wedding with the Dode as he greets his bride. So the bridegroom will be coming out of his inner chamber, of his special room, and the bride from her bridal chamber, Chupa. Why? Because we're heading to Sukkah. This is the result of Numbers 19 and Numbers 5, the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah on behalf of the restored Isha, the woman of Yisrael. Now, as stated previously, the shofar, of course, is blown to announce the two harvests of Shabuah and Teruah. And thereafter, we're all hands on deck preparing for a glorious homecoming on Kippurim. And then we're devoting ourselves for the next 1,000 years to Sukkah. This is what we're about. These are who God is describing at this point. So, Dode is that groom. Yisrael will be his bride. He's also our Savior. And so Yahweh, through Yoel, is encouraging Israelites to make this connection between being harvested on Shabuah and Teruah and this opportunity as a mortal remnant to be fed and nourished and led into the grand celebration of Sukkah and our return to the garden. So as we move from these thoughts to the next presentation of our God, there is far more to the story than initially meets the eye. especially in this context. There is a profoundly important connection between the greater and lesser luminaries as Dode and Yada. And this is manifest in the temple's colonnade, particularly when approaching the altar at this time. And that's important because you're going to have the sacrifice in front of it during Teruah. And this draws our attention back to Ruth and Boaz, because it's Boaz's name that we find on the north column. So that's why we keep returning to this discussion. And it reads, then he asked with ongoing implications, this would be Boaz, "Who are you?" She answered, "I'm Ruth, longing and striving to shepherd the flock, tending to and feeding the sheep as your Amma, your productive mother. So spread out the hem of your garment and the wings of it over your Amma, your maternal co-worker, who is branded and marked to deliver the kinsman, redeemer, the Gaal, saving you." Ruth 3:9. Since the kinsman redeemer is Dode, in the waning years of the third millennia, Ruth would become his Amma, and Boaz would be his Ab, his father. And so to commemorate the rebirth of the Son of God, Boaz's name is enshrined on the left column of the temple, along with an ode to Dode, because he is mentioned on the right side, closer to the city of Dode. And so it says, he is established, erected by standing upright, that which pertains to the Amundim, unifying support pillars for the Alam, portico, of the Hekel temple. When he established and stood upright, that which pertains to the Amud, unifying juxtaposition of the support pillar, on the right side, on the right hand, on the which is the south, he was called and proclaimed, read aloud and summoned for the Mikre by that which is associated with the name, reputation, and renown of Yeken, one with the ability to overcome, to succeed, endure, and establish. And this is the story of Dode. He fell precipitously during his life as the shepherd boy who became king. But in his last 10 years, he was restored. And in his next life, he stood taller than anyone who has ever lived. He ultimately overcame, proving that he could, demonstrating to Yahweh that he could be trusted. We endure because he endured. He established the covenant family. And it says, then he established by standing upright that which pertains to the Amud, the upright pillar, by his side to endure, standing together on the left side or north, so as to be properly clothed. And he was called out and proclaimed, read aloud and summoned for the Mikre by that which is associated with his name, reputation, and renown, as Boaz, the powerful one with prevailing strength. Therefore, Yahweh is not only reminding us of whose names are on the portico of the colonnade and why they are there, but also that the sacrifice being offered before them is central to these events and to this day. It is their collective willingness to fulfill the Moedim and the role that these days play in the restoration of humanity that caused Yahweh to address the Maor, the luminaries, in the opening chapter of the Torah. And now at this critical juncture, Yoel is bringing all of this together, all for our edification. He is even pleading with his people to not let this lesson be lost on them, such that they forfeit their inheritance. For the purpose of understanding and making the connections between the portico, the colonnade leading to the temple, and approaching the altar, and the implications of the sacrifice, those who are officiating will weep, even of their own accord. They are serving Yahweh, and so they will say, you have emphatically chosen to do as requested and to demonstrate compassion and mercy by providing deliverance for your people, Yahweh. So do not allow your property as a share of what was offered as an inheritance to become dishonored or jeopardized by a slogan of the Goyim to determine who controls it. Why should they constantly say among the people, where is their God? Yoel, Yahweh's God. Joel 2:17. Yes, the time will come when every eye will tear up tears of joy as Yahweh returns with doubt. And yet before that time, we have Goyim of all ilk screaming, Palestine will be free, as if Allah were a God. Where's the God of the Jews that he can't topple those ugly scars on the Temple Mount and replace the dome and the mosque with the temple, reestablishing those columns? Where is their God? Well, the fact is, where is their God? The Jews erased him. They drove him out of their lives. They won't say his name. They plastered over his Torah with their Talmud. This is what has happened. So on this day, it is the day that the body of Yada, as the man from Edom and the Adam of Parah, is going to serve as the sacrificial offering within the altar, reestablished for this purpose. Yeah, it's going to be a gruesome affair, but it needs to get the people's attention. Satan's goons will bludgeon him to death for all to see on the Temple Mount. And so on, as Yahweh releases the cleansing waters and ignites the purging flames, the smoke now billowing to the heavens, going to cause tears of joy and of shame. And while we know that Eliah is going to serve eloquently as the master of ceremonies, reprising what he had accomplished 2,888 years ago, I suspect that those assisting him will be among the 8 individuals designated during the Shabuah harvest. They will be reminding the audience gathered in Jerusalem at the conclusion of the time of trouble that this is the deliverance that they had requested and that is being mercifully provided by Yahweh. They will also convey the seriousness, the gravity of this situation. Well, this is, my friends, the last chance that Israelites will have, that anyone will have. You will have to have disgorged religion and politics, however, replacement foolology, to be part of any of this. So as we continue to glean as much as Yahweh allows regarding the service of the greater and lesser luminaries represented by the sun and moon, we will consider how these same individuals are represented metaphorically by the trees of lives and of knowledge in the garden. And we will continue to ponder the implications of Adam and Chawa, then Chanukh, Noach, and Shem, all on our voyage through time. And this will lead us back to the columns on the portico of the temple because of the story of Ruth and Boaz. It's one of the most illuminating found anywhere. And in the meantime, we're going to conclude our review of Yoel so that we understand how the greater and luminaries, as the sun and moon, continue to serve as markers of time and as the means to benefit from the remaining Moedim. So there's much to resolve because the intervening period from creation to resolution, well, it lasts a full 6,000 years, of which only 7 years remain. As we know, Muslims, Christians, and Marxists have long coveted Israel, even renaming it Palestine, giving Roman Emperor Hadrian the last laugh. But the promised land is Yahweh's gift to his people, and so he intends to reclaim and return it. Those who protest otherwise can take there from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free and shove it where the sun don't shine. Fact is, their banners and their slogans are perfectly suited for their future abode in Sheol. Thank Yahweh, we will be free at them at last. So Yahweh will be envious, having his passions and jealousy for exclusivity in the relationship aroused for his land. And he will show mercy and compassion by sparing his people and his family. Yoel 2:18. And that is all she wrote for the absurd notion of Christian Gentiles becoming God's new besties. Yahweh's chosen people have not changed in 4,000 years. His desire is for them to return to him, embrace his Torah, his Mikre and Bereth, and inherit the land. All of the anti-Semitic rhetoric of Christians, Muslims, and Marxists will have been for naught. And speaking of those Peter and Paul fooled, I would be remiss by failing to mention that the wannabe 13th apostle was wrong when he wrote in the first letter addressed to Corinth that love is not jealous. Au contraire, it is, and it must be. Unfortunately, by this time, most of Israel will be in ruins. Some 10 million Israelites will have died worldwide. It's not God's fault, but theirs. And of course, the fault of religion and politics, conspiracy and anti-Semitism, and just general thuggery. To reach the remnant of those who are receptive, and there you found a very happy pair of dogs. What a cute picture that was of two receptive dogs, even two receptive swinging chairs saying, I'm waiting for you. Isn't that just absolutely adorable? We can learn a lot from that picture, can't we? I love it. So to reach the remnant of those who are receptive before it is too late. In this next pronouncement, we learn that Yahweh is offering what is rightfully associated with the expansive growth related to the harvest of grain, Shabuah, the freshly pressed and renewing wine recently harvested, and preparing the vineyard for the heirs, this glistening and brilliant pressed olives, Teruah, so that you will be satisfied with the fulfillment. Yahweh said that he provided the answer by responding. And he said to the people of his family, please take note and pay attention to me. I'm reaching out to you by sending to you that which is associated with the expansive growth related to the wheat, which has been harvested, the freshly pressed and renewing wine, recently prepared for the heirs of the vineyard, and the glistening and brilliant oil from recently pressed olives, so that you will be abundantly satisfied, so that you will be fulfilled by this. And I will no longer allow you to ever again be taunted or insulted, held in contempt or reviled among the foreigners and nations. Yoel 2:19. God was not speaking, of course, of sending the people a care package. He is not going to offer them tasty treats. He's not actually speaking of grain or of olives or of grapes, but instead offering what they represent. Wheat representing the most mature covenant members, such as have recently been harvested and have moved heavenward on Shabuah. They will be returning by sharing what they have learned. The remnant will experience expansive growth because of them. Those who are harvested on Shabuah, who have moved into the seventh dimension with Yahweh and all the liberty and empowerment and enrichment, enlightenment that provides. Imagine what they are going to choose to come back to the limited world of this planet in 3D and the captive nature of bodies. And it's a lot to give up on behalf of that remnant. But that's the attitude that God wants. That's why I recognize that God's not going to make a decision based upon my suggestions, and that he's never asked my opinion on such matters and is likely not going to do so. But if in fact we were to be withdrawn, whether it's this Shabuah or next Shabuah, and we have, if it's next 33 months time away, my first request, well, maybe not my first, but one early request is, can we go back down? This is wonderful. I love it. But there's so much time to spend here in Shamayim. If you let us go back down, we can change other lives, get other people's attention, enrich the quality of this family. Let us go back. He knows better than I, and there are other implications in this regard. And he knows his people, and they're so recalcitrant that perhaps the only way that they will ever acquiesce to choose Yahweh is to have their backs so much up against the wall that there's no other alternative, and they need to be left alone, such that they come to realize that God is their last and best hope. Anyway, the red wine that has been freshly pressed and capable of preparing the heirs for their inheritance, it's symbolic of the Adamah Parah, the bloody red man and the productive bull on Teruah. The man from Edom is dressed in red, as Yashayah states. He emerges from the wine vat again, as we read in the 63rd chapter of Isaiah, having pressed these grapes with the prophet. And his sacrifice at this time will completely purge the people of their guilt, fully satisfying their debt. And you know what's interesting is that when Yashayah presents this, and he says, that's my Zeroah, that's my strong arm cultivating this final harvest, making it productive, and that he's in that wine vat with me. At long last, I have someone in that wine vat with me. And he says, the man from Edom is going to save many with me. Well, it strongly insinuates that we're going to have quite a support cast come our return to on Passover, or sometime during this process, during the end of the time of troubles, or maybe we have to go all the way to Teruah before we get the full cast of characters. But if Yashayah is envisioning himself returning to support his Zeroah and this man from Edom, wouldn't we also expect Yirmiah, Hosea, Zechariah, Malachi, Moshe? Anyway, it's going to be the most extraordinary day in the history of the universe. I wouldn't want to miss it. If I'd take the ticket out of Shamayim, of heaven, to watch what God's going to be doing at this time. And it appears that is going to be the case. So the glistening olive oil in this depiction speaks of those gleaned as the sun sets on Teruah. They will have ascended as a river of life for a also quick glimpse of heaven. But just think of the empowerment and the confidence and the enrichment of such an experience, even if it is for a matter of moments. Those moments could be extended to seem like a prolonged period of time, but after you've been chosen and you're part of that group that is, your covenant, and that you're immortal and you're going to be spending an eternity with Yahweh, and you've been taken to Shamayim to see it, even though immediately you're going to come back for the festivities of the greatest show on earth, on Teruah, and the royal wedding on Kippurim, and the reentrance into Eden as our planet is transformed on Sukkah, I just think that even a moment, I've said this so many times on the Shabuah harvest, I'd be happy with an hour break. That would be good. Then let's go back to work. Now, a little longer might be beneficial. We got a lot to work on, a lot to learn, a lot to. I mean, I'd like to go to Yahweh school, and so that I'm really, really, really prepared. You know, I shared in a previous show that the most liberating thing I have ever done is surrender my free will, because now I can approach each day without any consternation, without any worry. And so it would just be nice to be able to participate in all of this. And I think it would be tremendously liberating for everyone. So anyway, the glistening olive oil, it is those gleaned on Teruah. But like all covenant members, they will want to be where they are the most helpful. And on this day, that's going to be serving in support of the remaining remnant. And in this way, every requirement is going to be met, and every need will be greeted appropriately. It'll be a great abundance. And the most important thing is that at this moment in time, there'll be no more religious and political dehumanization and demonizing of Jews. It's all over. It will never occur again, which means that there will be no Christians or Muslims, no Marxists or Hindus, no anti-Semites, no militants, no patriots remaining, since their religions were predicated on demeaning and denouncing God's people. So we have already learned that wheat is symbolic of the more prominent and mature, especially valuable standing grain that is harvested on Shabuah. It is the most abundantly satisfying result, perhaps of all of the mikveh, not so much in quantity, but certainly in quality, because all of the recipients will receive a double portion of a 10-fold increase in capability, energy, and aptitude. Of course, going from 3 dimensions to 7. And they will have made this choice on their own initiative and will have the added sense of joy that comes from knowing they can meet God and know that they made a positive difference, that He is pleased with what they've contributed. And while on the subject of dagan, which is grain, which is typically wheat, we read in Debatim Words 8:8 that chitta, wheat, which means to project maturity and prominence, was listed as the first and thus considered the most valuable product of the land. Even before saroa, barley, which is a bit tempestuous and involved sometimes in circular reasoning, geffen, which was next, trindles of grapes, which is also a bent vine, tana, which are figs, an opportune time to approach, rimnom, pomegranates, to be lifted up, zayeth shemin, olives and their shimmering oil, shining and glowing, and dabash, honey, the enduring and satisfying nature of the word. So in this example, wheat was listed first because it is symbolic of Shabuah, the designated ingathering of varieties of chittaim, wheats. And it is symbolic of Yisraelites and Goyim leaving earth upon the onset of the time of trouble, for their years of intense preparation to serve effectively when we return. Also interesting, grain for bread, grapes, and that which becomes wine, and olives pressed into oil represent things, as I have shared so many times before, all that have to be crushed. Grain to make bread, grapes to make wine, olives to make oil. And being pressed, being put into action and and challenged. That's what's necessary for someone to demonstrate that God can trust them. And that's what's going to occur for the last and final time for Israel. These three things also represent matzah, Pesach, and Bikurim, which is why God's people will find them, well, both fulfilling and satisfying. This prioritization among divine ingredients gives special meaning to the upcoming harvest. This is how God himself described Chag Shabua, affirming that it exists as a Bikurim Katzir of Chittim and as an Asaph ingathering at the turning point of the end. This marvelous prophecy is one of many affirming that we have been right all along regarding its purpose and now even of its timing. Pursuant to Yahweh providing what we need to prevail, let's consider this from the Torah. You should act to capitalize upon the feast of Shabuoth, promises of the Shabbat, for you all to approach as a Bikurim, first fruits, Katzir, harvest of Chittim, of wheats, and as a Chag celebration of the Ashif ingathering at the turning point, at the end, Tekupa, to change, to be different than that which has been repetitive over the years. Shemot names, Exodus 34:22. Yahweh's testimony is powerful, it's uncompromising, it's clear. And there should be no doubt as to what Shabuoth, and in the plural, this Shabuoth represents, what it made possible, when it's going to occur. The only questions are, how many will participate, and will you be among them? And if not, will you respond appropriately so that you're part of the teruah harvest thereafter? The Spirit's role in preparing the Choder for this mission is, of course, detailed throughout the 11th chapter of Yeshayah, Deliverances from Yahweh, found in Isaiah. It's also presented in the 14th Mashal, word picture. And more than this, the teruah harvest is of olives, something more fully explained in Yeshayah in conjunction with the tree, with the time of Jacob's troubles. And it's interesting that that final harvest is of a tree, and it talks about having a stem or a stick beat that tree to get that last of the fruit out of the tree, because it is the tree of knowledge that is going to provide access to the tree of lives at this time. Of course, more on all of this in a moment. When trying to more fully ascertain the reason for the reference to the new wine from the vineyard of inheritance, in between these harvests of grain and of olives, we find a number of, I think, tantalizing clues. The first includes a reference to the children of the Nakar, this observant foreigner. And so it pertains to this mission at this very time. Of that, Yahweh says, Yahweh has made a promise 7 times over, swearing an oath by Yemen, his right hand, and by his Oz, his strengthened and empowered one. His Zeroah, the one cultivating the seeds for this harvest. It is no longer foreseeable or possible that I will allow your grain, particularly wheat, grown for the harvest, to be given ever again, to be consumed in a questionable way, and to be processed destructively by your enemies, if the children of the Nakar of thee, observant foreigner, choose to consume your freshly pressed and renewing wine, your recently harvested and prepared inheritance from the vineyard, over which the benefit of the relationship you have labored with him. Yeshaya, Isaiah 62:8, right before God speaks of the man from Edom and emerging from this wine vat. This is similar to the prophecy in Yoel. It reinforces the idea that the wine is being served as a way to celebrate what we are inheriting. And the timing is similar as well, suggesting that these prophecies are related. Further, this time, Yahweh reveals that it's the result of a promise that he has made 7 times over, and that he intends to honor it. And he's going to do so by working with and through his Yamin, his right hand, who is Oz, fortified and strengthened, as in Boaz, the Zeroah, the one cultivating the harvest, his Nakar, observant foreigner. Brings it all together for you, doesn't he? God even goes so far as to say that his promises are contingent upon the beneficiaries laboring alongside his chosen implements. Are you going to heed that call? Of course, there's more to the events of Teruah than enabling and preparing the remnant for Dod's return, because this is also the moment when, well, Donald Trump as Rahab, this diabolical and egotistical man possessed by Satan, is going to be cast off, tormented for a good while as recompense for what he has done, and then some days later dispatched to Sheol. This malevolent betrayer of Yisrael, as a New Yorker, is the northerner who has tried to hide the fact that he is representing Satan. I don't suppose that he will be enjoying all the attention he's going to receive. The prophet reveals, and pursuant to the northerner, who has hidden his true identity, I will send far away from you, and I'm going to banish him, exiling him as an outcast to a realm that is parched and desolate, ruinous and uninhabitable, plagued in anxiety and clothed in horror, with his face towards the sea of the eastern confrontation, and his rear end towards the sea of the end in the west. And his stench will rise, and the foul odor and putrid smell of him will fester and ascend. For it is certain that he has done some exceedingly arrogant things. Yoel knew him, saw him, smelled him. Well, Donald Trump is the great betrayer of Israel, and the world will spend an eternity, and in the end, I should say, he's going to spend his forever in Sheol. He's going to be subject to a 7-fold recompense for what he has done to harm many, especially Jews, before suffering that indignity. But what I want to share with you is what I find so delicious in this prophecy is that Trump is not only well known for pooping in his pants. Now, there are not many leaders that you can say they are known to poop in their pants and to stink to high heaven, but he is. And many of those who are closest to him admit that he stinks, that he reeks. And since he has to be perceived as a god ruling the world, God is going to accommodate his wish with his head over the contested Persian Gulf and his arse stretched all the way to the end in the west. He'll be bigger than life. And while he will stink up a storm after all he has said and done, certainly, the reminder that he got it in the end, that this is his fate, I think is quite satisfying. The man bribed by Muslims and worshipped by Christians, whose favorite word has been winning, and whose ego has always been unbridled, is going to serve as the ultimate exemplar of failure. And of course, as a side note, those of us who will be in Jerusalem won't sniff a whiff of this, because we will be enjoying the sweet smell of barbecued bull with the smoke of the sacrifice billowing to the heavens. This is likely Eliah's idea, of course. He is the one who poked fun at the Lord of Religion, asking if he was delayed in responding because he was taking a potty break. So evidently, God thought the prank was fun once. It's worth repeating. Now, as we move forward, there are two questions we must resolve. First, is the Adamah Parah a man, a woman, or simply dirt? You want to write Adamah as ground, dirt. And what are you to make of the fact that Adam means man? What are you to make of the fact that dam in the middle of it means blood? What are we to make of the ending, which takes a masculine noun and makes it feminine? And second, after encouraging and commending him, her, it 3 times, we are left to determine whether this individual is being further acknowledged for having performed well on behalf of Yahweh, or if there is a sudden change in focus such that Yahweh is being credited and extolled for having made what was stated previously possible. Of particular interest in this regard is the Adamah who, by his sacrifice on behalf of Israel at this time, will bring Rahab down. The Adamah who was the first person to correctly identify Trump as Satan and as the great betrayer, having done so back in November of 2024, well, he's the first to accurately translate, assess, and convey the intent of the many prophecies regarding the last days and what Trump and the devil will do as they are presented in Isaiah and Daniel and in Joel. Even more relevant, Yada was the first to make the connections between the Adamah Parah and the fulfillment of Teruah as explained in Numbers 5 and 19. Also in Yeshayah 17. We should be cautious about making the mistake of assuming that the feminine ending to an otherwise masculine name or noun always makes the subject feminine. Well, consider Yahweh's name as the prime example. Feminine titles and descriptors are commonly used throughout the Torah and prophets to depict men, as is the case with every spiritual attribute ascribed to the Choder, which are all rendered with feminine suffixes. But Choder is masculine. What we have learned is that the addition of the concluding he is often just happenstance, and that every noun is assigned a gender, and often without respect to its biological gender. However, we also find that there's a trend among words like etz, tree, becoming etzah, blossoming, such that it portrays the entire portrait, offers fruit that will last forever. And Adam, man, and bullish and bullish man associated with blood, and Adamah, and Par, bull, which becomes Parah, and that is a productive bull. So that concluding hey is an indication of a fuller expression of the designated term. In this way, as I've shared, Etzah grows beyond a single tree and branches out to frame the entire picture of life in the garden and on earth. Parah becomes a productive bull, doing what needs to be done to protect the herd. And Adamah is a celebration of life with the first man, while also conveying the bloody red result of the sacrifice on this day from this man of the earth. It, of course, is comparable to a good marriage, where there is synergy between a man and a woman, such that they work together and can accomplish even more than the sum of their independent attributes. This is likely why Yahweh was so supportive of the idea that Ruth and Boaz, by a variety of names, would always remain together. 1 plus 1, from God's view, equals 10,000 in their case. Now, with all of this in mind, Eretz is the Hebrew word for land. Tabel is used for world. And Adamah would just be dirt. So I don't think any of this applies to the soil. And since it follows the humiliation of Rahab, there is every reason to see the Adamah as the man credited for bringing him down. Adamah, the bloody red and grounded man of the earth, representing Adam. You should never be intimidated. Don't ever be fearful or awestruck, neither be concerned nor distressed. You should choose to celebrate your situation, reflecting on your positive attitude. You will have every reason to joyfully commemorate what is transpiring and be pleased. You'll be content. You're going to be delighted in the end with the result. Joel 2:21, at least in part. Clearly, Yahweh is the one who makes all of this possible. But as we know, his preference is to share credit. After all, the more he acclaims those who manifest the proper attitude and accomplish what he wants done, the more his people will pay attention to them, and this will advance his will. Therefore, I'm going to present the concluding statement to reflect both of these possibilities. This is because Yahweh, he is great, enriching, empowering, growth-oriented, and nurturing, for acting and for engaging. Or you can render the rest of 2:21 as, this is because he, lowercase h, is being esteemed for being enriching and empowering, for promoting growth, and for being nurturing, for acting and engaging on behalf of Yahweh. Now, either way, God wants us to be bold, to speak and act without fear, and to never be intimidated. It is one of the lessons I relish because, well, it suits my bullish personality and it's consistent with everything God has said. And I've always been bothered by timidity around God. Why did Moshe run from his people and do so many times and perform so many faceplants? What caused the spies to see giants when they should have seen fleas? Why was Shamuel nervous about offending the king when searching for Dode on behalf of God? Why was Dode so intimidated by Shaul? When working with Yahweh, we have the full strength and support of the Almighty, and we should act accordingly. It is always good news to know that by working together on behalf of Yahweh and his people, we prevail, providing a satisfying fulfillment of what God wants to achieve and these prophecies. So, as a direct result, Yehudim will return to Yah, and as they do, Yahweh will respond. Our Father, he's done amazing things, creating the universe and conceiving life. He nurtured a relationship with Adam in the garden. He protected Noah and his family aboard the ark, and he established the covenant with Abraham and Sarah. He is not only the one who oversaw and instigated the conception of Yisrael, but also emancipated his people from tyranny, and he's going to do so again. Our time with God isn't ending. It is just beginning. And all the while, he will raise us as his children. He's going to help us grow. Based upon the methods deployed on these situations, and even on the ark, we would expect that Yahweh will spare the animals, and he's going to repopulate the earth once it has been restored following the great purge of politics and religion. This is why there is no need for any animal to be distressed. The author of life has a better world in store for every soul. He said, "Do not be distressed or concerned, animals of the open environs, because the beautiful pastures and the lovely dwelling places of the deserts are becoming verdant and growing. Surely the tree, the Etz, lifts up and bears its fruit, the fig tree and the vine. They give their vigor, their strength, and their noble character." Yoel, Yahweh's God, Joel 2:22. So we are returning to Eden for another chance to build a relationship with God and to prove our worth in the garden. Everything will be beautiful, productive, and uplifting, including the tree of lives and the tree of knowledge, even the renewed vigor of the fig, as well as the vine, symbolic of Yahweh's people flourishing in the land. Those who survive and respond to him will be Sheal, enriched and empowered with noble characteristics. So rejoice over these favorable circumstances, children of Zion. Demonstrate a positive attitude and be elated with Yahweh, your God, for he has provided for you a teacher and a guide who offers an outpouring of directions regarding the Torah as the autumn rain, so that you can be right and thus vindicated. He has brought down for you an abundant shower of guidance and instruction, an outpouring of teaching to ponder about being gleaned and growing thereafter, as was intended from the very beginning. Yoel, Yahweh's God, Joel 2:23, one of my very, very favorite passages. And what a lovely place for us to return on our next episode of Luminaries, whether it be from here or maybe we'll move back to the Rainbow Studio for this covenant blessing. But this is a powerful presentation of words taking on a life of their own, of us benefiting from going to the roots and analyzing each word as a treasure, as a marvelous jewel to be observed and appreciated. So we will indeed rejoice over these favorable circumstances. We are going to, in fact, celebrate those who are the children of Zion. We recognize how important it is to have a positive attitude. But most important of all, we recognize the value of God's Torah and how it's going to pour forth even more profusely as we move through time. Thank you for listening. Look forward to being with you tomorrow.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch y'all on our next podcast.